Okay, well now we're going to wind a bobbin. So we start out by putting the thread up here, put the appropriate spool cap on. I like to back it off a little bit so that that can spin if it wants to. Then we're going to take our thread, pull it underneath the guide number 1. Then it's going to go under this little spring-loaded thread guide. That's important. Then we take the end of our thread, and if you need to, you can snip that just to make sure it's not fuzzy at the end. But you're going to go through the side of the bobbin from inside to outside, like that. Pull about 6 inches or so, maybe a little bit more, out of there. And make sure that your thread tail is going upwards. Then we're going to pull the bobbin winder spindle to the right. Now at this point, you're going to hang on to this. Don't let it drop, because if it drops, it's just going to get all wound around there. And so you want to keep that thread up out of the way. Put your foot on the pedal and give it a little bit of power so it starts spinning around. Now you notice this is spinning, the needle's not going up and down because the bobbin winder is pushed to the right and is telling the machine we're winding a bobbin. So at this point, it's made several wraps of thread around the beginning of that thread tail. I'm going to stop and cut off my thread tail close to the bobbin like that, and then we just continue to wind the bobbin. Okay, I'm going to stop at this point because I only want a little bit of thread on my bobbin. If I wanted to fill it full, it would push, the thread would push against this little stopper here, which would effectively push the bobbin winder spindle away from there, and that would keep it from overwinding. Okay, so pull this back, snip it off like that. Now, we're going to put the bobbin into the machine. The cover, when you hold it upright, you can see that it has a little picture right here of how to put your bobbin thread in. Hold it like a letter P. You can see that the thread comes down here on the left-hand side. So make sure you're not holding it like a letter Q. It's got to be a letter P. Then you go put this bobbin right in there like that. There's a little groove right here in front. You want to make sure your thread goes right into that. And then stop your bobbin from spinning with your finger right here. Pull the thread towards the back. And notice how the thread sunk right down there between the thick piece of metal and the thin piece of metal. That's what we want. Then you're going to put your cover on, but make sure that the thread is not caught in the teeth of the cover. Just push it straight back out of the way like that and snap it on. Okay, now we're going to thread the top. So we put it underneath the guide number 1. Make sure it gets right down into this little groove here. Follow the guidelines down to 2. See how the arrow goes up this way. Come around 3 here. There's an arrow. It shows you which way to thread it. As you're threading your machine, make sure that the take-up lever is up in the highest position so that you can get that threaded. Then we come right back down this way, and then there's a little hook on this left-hand side. You're going to go up and over, so now that part is threaded. Next part is threading the needle. This has a needle threader, as we talked about. When you're threading, make sure that your needle is up at the highest position. So you may need to adjust your hand wheel a little bit just to make sure it's up at the highest position. Pull the needle threader down, swivel it forward, put your finger back here. Now, you can use your thumb to put your thread under the left-hand hook. Pull the thread straight across in front of the needle under the right-hand hook, or right here. Now I'm holding the thread tail up at an upward angle. Move your fingers back to the little handle, swivel this back, gently pull it up, and when it's all the way up, let go with the thread tail. That loop there, pull that through, and you've threaded your needle. Now we still need to pull up the bobbin thread through the needle plate. So holding your thread upwards like this, roll your hand wheel towards you, one complete turn, one complete revolution until you see that take-up lever up there again. Now, there's your loop of bobbin thread. So here's my little Karen trick for pulling up the bobbin thread. I'm going to put my top thread under the foot, between the toes there, use the tail end of that, swipe that straight back, and now we have our machine threaded and ready to sew. So let's take a couple of pieces of fabric here. I'm going to take a couple of contrasting pieces of fabric. We've got our machine set up for straight stitch, normal stitch length, center needle position. Put your presser foot down, so put your presser lever down. Now I'm using my left hand, so I'm not in the way of where you can see. Normally you'd use your right hand. And then gently press on the pedal to make it go. To make it go backwards a few stitches, push this all the way down. Not just a little bit, but all the way down. And then it goes backwards a little bit and it goes forward. When you come to the end of your stitches, don't stitch off the end of your fabric because you could potentially tangle up your thread. So stop about a 1/4 inch away. Do about 3 stitches backwards, stitch forward to where you stopped before. Now to take our fabric out from under the presser foot, roll the hand wheel so that you can just barely see the take-up lever there. Now it has completed a stitch. Lift up your presser lever, take your fabric and pull it around the side of your machine, and it cuts the thread really nicely. And there is our stitch. One of the controls I've neglected to mention before is this is your thread tension for your top thread. When you are sewing and you have your presser lever down, see how it puts tension on the thread? If I move this all the way to 0, no tension at all, see there's no tension. So this between 3 and 5 is your normal tension for sewing. Most of the time you're just not going to mess with this, it's just fine. But right now with the presser foot down, that thread is tight, which is what it should be for sewing. When you lift your presser foot up, you can pull your fabric out from under there, cut your thread. Right. Another thing about the presser lifter, which is kind of nice with these machines, is you could, by pushing it up a little bit higher, you can lift it up high. This is very good if you have something lofty like quilt batting or like a microtex fiber that you're trying to get underneath the presser foot in order to sew. You can lift this up a little bit higher, put it under there, and then put it all the way down. Make sure you have this all the way down when you're sewing, because if you try to sew with it up, you're going to get a thread tangle because, again, there's no tension on your thread, and you're going to get loops on the back. All right. So another wonderful stitch that we're going to get into, we have woven fabric. And the woven fabric tends to want to fray, right? If we have a seam allowance that on a garment or something we've sewn that we're going to wash that garment at some point, you're going to get some fraying happening. So to keep that from happening, we have this wonderful zigzag stitch. So to choose that, we go over to Stitch Selector. But right away, before we move this stitch selector, we always want to glance over here to make sure the needle's up. If that needle was down in the fabric and I moved it to a different stitch, then when I started sewing, it could bend or break the needle. So for safety purposes, before you move this or move this, look over here, make sure the needle is up. It doesn't matter what this is, really, the needle's got to be up. So I'm going to move over here to CB. Why is it called CB? It's because right now it's C, but if I moved over here, it would be no width at all. It would be basically B. So I'm going to show you that, demonstrate that. First of all, I'm going to show you the reason why I cut this edge here. Okay, as we sew, notice how the needle is going past the edge of the fabric and then into the fabric. What that's going to do is overcast. We can do a little bit of a back stitch. Again, when we stop, got to make sure that's all the way up there. Now that is not going to fray. No matter how much I work it, it's not going to have these little threads coming off the end. That's a wonderful use for zigzag. Okay, if I was going to zigzag at, here, I'll show you what it looks like. Needle down, I can turn this. That's what this normal zigzag, the widest width, looks like. Move it up. Let's go down to 3 here. Now we have a narrower zigzag, like that. That's stitch width. But what would happen if we put our zigzag stitch on 0? We just have a straight stitch. This shows you how, using the width knob, you can adjust your zigzag. So let's put it back up to 5. And zigzag stitch, it's going to look just exactly like this. But let's say we want a short zigzag. So I can go down here to 1. So you can see it's going a lot slower. Now, if I want to show you what something looks like by turning this, and I don't want to lose my place, that's why I turn this so the needle goes down. Now I haven't lost my place. See how much shorter that is? So you can do both length and width. Let's go down to 3. A short, narrow zigzag. One of the neat things about a short, narrow zigzag is you can use that on a stretchy seam, like stretchy fabric that really stretches a lot, and that seam is never going to pop. All right. So that's some of your basic stitches. When you're done with your stitch, you want to put things back to normal. And that way, you know, when you start sewing, it's all back to normal. All right. Let's see, I'm going to show you another really neat stitch. So you've got denim, which is on the straight of the grain, pretty stable, but denim jeans or pants. On the bias, you've got some stretch. That's what this is really, really good for. So I'm going to go over here to stretch stitch. We're going to keep it in A, but we're going to do this stitch right here, and I'm going to do it on the bias. Why am I doing it on the bias? Think about this. When you have pants that split in the back, it's because that thread, the fabric is stretching on the bias, but the thread is not stretching. So this is going to be a way that you can repair those pants, or if you're sewing your pants to begin with, use this stitch in the back crotch seam. What it does is it goes 2 stitches forward, 1 stitch back. A little bit slower to get through this, but it's going to be a nice strong seam. And it's going to stretch with the bias of the fabric. Plus, you've got 3 times as much thread in there. Nice, strong seam. All right. One thing I did want to show you about why, remember I talked about having the take-up lever all the way up here. If you simply stop sewing with your needle up, you have not completed your stitch. So when you go start to pull your fabric out of there, it feels like it's caught. Well, it is, because the thread can't flow until you're done making a stitch. That's why the take-up lever needs to be up. Now, you don't want it way up, because now your needle's starting to come down, and if it's down enough, your fabric's going to scratch across that needle when you take it out. So what I like to tell people is you need to just have it barely peeking up. That's about right.